You're all here because you want to know what the global risks to global growth are. We could probably have this session once every 2 weeks, once every month, and each time it would be different because as things change and as things get modified and new events come along, we're constantly all trying to work out what the new global risks are, and then come the ones which come left field, right field, and you're simply not expecting them. So I want to hear from those up here, the panelists, and I want to engage you as soon as possible. So after I've heard from all 5 panelists up here, I would invite you to come back quickly so we can get going with a discussion. Let's start with demography. And Nicholas Eberstadt, what areas do you see? Because I think what you want to talk about is going to help frame some of the other issues raised by other panelists.
Well, I don't believe that demography is destiny, but I think it does alter the realm of the possible. And there are 3 big trends I'd mention for you this afternoon that I don't think have been fully discounted as risk factors in the world economy. The first is the relentless march towards sub-replacement fertility, which is to say towards childbearing patterns which over time would lead to a peaking and indefinite decline of populations in the absence of immigration. We know that Western Europe is very far below replacement at this point. Western Europe is on the eve of becoming a permanent net mortality society, and it's immigration that's just postponing this from year to year in the future. But most of the world now lives in countries that are below replacement, and most of the world's sub-replacement populations are low-income countries. This is going to be a particular challenge for a country like China, which despite the splendor of Tianjin, is for the most part a low-income society. Within a generation, China is going to have a grayer age profile than the United States of 2030. And how to deal with so many older people who will have such needs on such still low levels of income is going to be a real question. A second factor that I'd mention, quite unexpected, has been the upsurge, the persistent upsurge in death rates in different parts of the world. We know about this with the tragedy of AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. Life expectancy in Africa is lower than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I'd bring your attention to the situation in Russia, which is undergoing a mortality catastrophe at the moment. In terms of excess mortality, Russia has suffered more than 2 World War I's worth of deaths since 1991. Russia's life expectancy is lower than it was 40 years ago, providing a sort of awful existence proof to the proposition that it's possible for health stagnation to occur in industrialized societies during peacetime. Russia's life expectancy is lower than India's at this point. How Russia is going to get to Irish living standards on an Indian survival schedule is a question that the Russian leadership hasn't answered yet. Finally, a wild card that I don't think has been fully appreciated, much less discounted, is the eerie and unnatural growth of imbalances between baby boys and baby girls. We see this in China, where now there may be as many as 5 baby boys being born for every 4 baby girls. In ordinary biological populations, the balance is much closer to 103 or 104 or 105 baby boys for every 100 baby girls. This prospect opens the possibility that there may be an enormous pool of unmarriageable young men in the decades in the future in places like China. This is the science fiction portion of the program, because we've never seen anything like this happen before, and how China or other societies where analogous trends are underway are going to cope with those sorts of challenges remains to be seen.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Sam, from your perspective.
Well, I would start by taking Nick's observations of looking at the demographics and backing way back from that and saying, as a business person, how do you begin to deal with these really large changes that are happening or risks that are happening in certain aspects? You talked about the demographics, but when you think about global risk, you're talking about risks that are larger than any one company can manage. Demographics is clearly one of those. Terrorism, pandemics, climate change, all the kinds of issues that are there. Now, most high-growth companies, most emerging companies, when they are looking at their marketplaces, they're looking at the risks that directly affect their business as they see it. I think you have to take a different view today than you might have taken just a decade ago, because what's created growth in our marketplaces over the last 10 years has been national reform of economies. It's been a wide open market for globalization and dramatic technological change. Anything that happens in any of those places is going to create constrictions to growth in the future. And what we're seeing today is clearly some countries backing off of reform. We're seeing restrictions to trade, and the Doha round is just an example of lack of progress. And the question is, how long will technological improvement create productivity? So small growth companies that are looking out at constrictions of opportunity may be missing these big macro questions, and I think that's something we need to focus on.
Thank you, Sam. Mohammad Gergawi, bring together a couple of those issues, particularly demography and the kind of challenges you're facing in the Middle East now, particularly on the employment issue.
Thank you, Nick. I mean, we live in a region where risk is high. It does affect a lot of multinational companies, basically, but within our region, our experience is quite unique. And it's a good model of how to survive a very high risk area. Within our area, there is definitely, I said, demographic. We need within the next 10 years, 80 million jobs. 60% of the population under the ages of 25. We have political risk. We have new conflict within our region. Despite that, as a company, you need to survive it. And if I look at my personal experience, we dealt with it because we were looking at these risks basically as we have a new rule in the global arena today. I don't think so. I think the change that's going to take in the next 10 years is going to be more than the past 100 years. Risk changes. As a company, I think we have to reinvent ourselves, and we have to have a new rule within our area. We shouldn't look only on our region. We got to look abroad. And some of the risks that I'm talking from being a company that live in a risk area, but also that we went internationally. When you go international, also there is a risk that a lot of company faces. One of the risks that was unpredictable for us, prejudice. If you are a Middle Eastern company, prejudice, I guess if I'll put it in a way that you have to work harder because there is certain stereotype about company from the Middle East, people from the Middle East, and this is part of the risk that we are taking. I think I don't want to add to energy. I think energy, health, epidemic, new epidemic, security issue, demographic. But within our region, the situation is quite unique, I think so. And always you have to be a good survival to move on. But I think whatever we're facing within our region, also the world is facing. We've been facing it for the past 15, 20 years. If you look at the risk of doing business in a certain region within a certain country within our region, with a new policy that's changing quite hard. What I'm saying here, the world is facing a new risk in its totality, basically. It's not only the Middle East, but it's beyond the Middle East. And we need to have a new type of company, a new type of CEO. We don't need a CEO who manages only businesses. We need a CEO who manages businesses, but also we need him to understand the social aspect of working in a lot of countries and the political aspect. So he is a CEO slash politician, if I'll put it in this way, or a policymaker at the same time.
Thank you very much. Anne Lauvergeon couldn't join us. Neville Isdell, you've joined us. So give us your update on these challenges to global growth.
I think the starting point is a pretty daunting question, because you can have a massively long list of the challenges that we face. It's really sorting out which ones over time we're going to look back upon as being the real ones that define the current state of the world. What I mean by that, I mean, remember the debate around the Club of Rome, the Malthusian dilemma. Now we have one of aging. What are the ones that are there that are real, that maybe we feel can be dealt with? And what are the ones that are actually going to change the system as we have it today? And that's where I'm going to go then with what Sam has been saying from a business standpoint. I think we're in real danger about losing the consensus around what has caused the growth of the world economy over the last 10 to 15 years. I would maybe put it as a headline as a increasing lack of economic literacy. And that economic literacy is certainly not in the political debate today. No understanding of the laws of comparative advantage. And what that does is it then exacerbates some of the other issues about immigration, about the number of people who are still in poverty. Because after all, economic growth has been the greatest generator of moving people out of poverty. But as we see barriers starting to be established, some of them in the name of other risks, energy self-sufficiency. Energy self-sufficiency gets into trade barriers. Trade barriers get into retaliation. Retaliation gets into, therefore, inhibiting the rate of growth. And I think, in fact, the point that was just being made about what businesses have to do, what CEOs have to do today, is a very valid one. I think we have to move past what I would call the Enron era, when we had our heads below the parapet, to engaging in this broader debate about society as a whole. Because if we don't do that, the social license that we have, the social license to operate, is going to be undermined, and then the reduction in economic growth that Sam talked about is almost going to be inevitable. And then we deal with a whole lot of new set of problems which exacerbate some of the more soluble ones. And I put poverty almost in that, because I think we know how to do it. But if we stop what we're doing, we're going to exacerbate that. Then we'll exacerbate immigration. So we have to take a holistic view of these things, and businesses have to engage on a much broader front. I hate the word being political, because I believe we cannot be political, and yet it's a political debate, and we have to be engaged within that debate. And in those terms, I would agree with you in terms of being political. The problem is that there are a large number of people trying to find simple solutions to complex problems, and those simple solutions are driving people to take protectionist measures which are not to the benefit of the world as a whole.
Neville, thank you very much indeed. Zhang Jianxing, can I invite you, Chairman of the Board for the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, your thoughts as you look at the global risks and the impact on global growth?
作为一个银行家，每天开会看文件，接触频率最高的词汇就是风险。想到这里来开会轻松一下，又面对了这个沉重的这个字眼，我们非常希望看到这个蓝天像大连的蓝天一样，但是呢，这个风险呢，总是呢那么周期性的出现，就像一年四季一样，我们总会遇到了那么不好的一个气候，就像最近在世界上有发生的那个次按债券的问题。那么风险呢，不断有新的形态出现。实际上，最大的风险就是风险的不确定性。你看，现在新的风险是从一个不仅像过去对新兴市场的风险，大家做了很多的研究。现在这场的风险是从一个发达的国家向其他的国家所蔓延的。我们这种的风险，它在短期处理一些风险的同时，可能就又隐藏了，又造成了未来更大的风险。现在大家看到这次次按贷款的产生，跟过去这个在各国的中央银行在采取的一些治理风险的一些货币政策的同时，却隐藏了未来更大的风险的产生。现在这个风险呢，会很快的进行全球的传播，不仅是在西方的国家，甚至在新兴市场国家，甚至中国的银行业也买了这个世界的这个按揭的这个债券。所以呢，新的风险、不可确定的风险，使我们现在呢，确实遇到了越来越多的需要重视的方面。
Thank you very much indeed. There are 4 microphones out there. If you'd like to come in, please grab one or get one in your direction so we can save time. I'd like to ask all of you, though, global risks to global growth. Should we be talking about new opportunities as well? I'm thinking about the climate change debate, not just the warnings and the inevitability of climate change being seen as a risk, but this is also, for many, an opportunity, the shift of a business model which is worrying about cost of environmental sustainability to seeing it as a new business opportunity. Is there any way you can just address that, about how a risk can become a new opportunity? Sam, perhaps.
If you think about just the one you speak of, Nick, climate change. Progressive companies that understand this issue are dealing with it themselves in the way they operate. But they're also using the way that they deal with that issue to engage their employees in the effort. And in the process of doing it, they're creating momentum in attracting better people, retaining people, and actually they're beginning to compete at a higher level because of the response that they've developed in climate change. So you would think, can one company or one enterprise actually make a difference in climate change? Probably not alone. It has to be done collaboratively. But can one company improve its business model by its response? Absolutely, because our employees are dying to see us do things to respond to climate change.
What kind of take-up do you see among your clients at PwC then? I mean, can you say it's 10% have seen the light, 90% have seen the light, or is it really being quite a slow development given the severity of the change from risk to opportunity?
You know, I think it's if you deal with the issue of climate change, which is clearly a global risk, and it's clearly an issue that no one company can deal with. It's different around the world. We did a survey of 1,000 CEOs back in the beginning of this year, we found that in Europe, close to 50% of the CEOs had active programs dealing with engaging their employees in the response to climate change, changing their own business model. In the U.S., the number was 14%. So there was a very dramatic difference. Japan was the highest. It was almost 80%. Other parts of Asia were in single digits. So what you see is it is very regional in the response. Now, I think if you look today, Nick, at that issue, just as if you had looked at pandemics a few years ago, the response today is dramatically higher than it would have been just a couple of years ago. Companies understand that it is not just their obligation to appear environmentally friendly, but their employees are demanding it. And frankly, if they don't get their business models right, they're not going to be competitive out into the long run.
So all of you, the idea of risk becoming an opportunity in global growth. Neville, I saw you nodding your head as well.
Well, businesses only last for 100 years if they continue to take risk as opportunities and redevelop their models. I mean, it's actually as simple as that. And I think part of that model going ahead is also societal engagement. I think the model of the last century, where the role of business was really defined, I suppose, by Friedman in terms of to make a profit for the shareholders, that is no longer enough today. If we are not seen, both in perception and in reality, as being an integral and functioning part of every community and society in which we operate, I think then the model that we have is in danger. I think that's the biggest single risk.
Nick.
A particular example of opportunity in risk would be, I think, the demographic situation in Western Europe now. And those of us who have friends in Europe hear the tales of woe about the demography of the continent. What we don't hear about are the tremendous opportunities that haven't been exploited yet in the current demographic situation in Western Europe. What do I mean in particular? Western Europe is enjoying the blessing of a health explosion, and the older cohorts in Western Europe are the healthiest, best educated people of their age that have ever existed on that continent. If we could unlock the value of health in the European continent, it would be possible to make productive use of these older potential workers in a way that could possibly quite dramatically revitalize the European economies. To do so, of course, would require a rethinking of the way that policies work in Europe, especially retirement policies, labor force policies, education policies. But the opportunity is there if citizens and governments wish to take them.
Mohammad Gergawi.
Nick, just as a humorous point, as a retiree who was brought back from retirement to work again, I can only echo that sentiment, and I hope my people in my business think it was valuable on retiring me.
Was that an opportunity or a risk?
For them a risk, for me an opportunity.
Mohammad Gergawi.
Nick, life is only 10% what happened to us and 90% how do we react to it actually. If we look at the opportunity, we talked about demographic, we talked of 80 million youth in the Arab world base. 80 million youth that they require a job in the next 10 years. There is two paths. We looked at it maybe yesterday in his Hana speech here in this platform. He said we created $10 billion fund for education for the Arab youth. There is a risk, but the opportunity really, if we can contribute to educate 80 million youngsters in the right way, then we'll have a tremendous opportunity in the whole of the Arab world. There is an opportunity basically, but with every risk we have to work hard. And as society, as company, as country, we gotta contribute to minimize the risk. The opportunity is educated population.
Zhang Chengqing, do you want to add anything? How to turn risk to opportunity before I go to the floor?
这个中国的词汇里面，机遇、这个风险这两个字的这个危机就是这两个字的组合。所以我想呢，比如说刚才讲到这个环境保护这个问题，像一些对能源的这个新的能源的使用，可再生的一些能源，包括一些环境保护的一些治理，都是一种新的一种机遇。所以我想呢，这个本身我们就是要善于抓住这一些在危险中间的一种机会。
Fine. Who's got the microphone, please? I can't see a hand going up. Have you got the microphone, please? Yes.
Very good. Good afternoon. My name is Erwan Michel Kajramzi, Managing Director of the Wharton School Risk Management and Decision Process Center. I guess my question for all panelists here, what we have seen over the past 2 or 3 years really is a huge demand from top decision makers to try to define new concepts to address these global risks, both externally but also internally. If you're international companies doing business in many countries, double-digit growth in many countries, how do you assure that you have a unique, coherent strategy to protect your own assets in these different countries? And how do you make sure that one of your divisions somewhere in the world won't be the weak link of your organization?
Before you sit down, I suspect your school probably already is teaching an answer to this. What's your perception of it?
Thank you, sir. Well, I mean, we have been partnering with the World Economic Forum for 3 years now, trying to at least raise the awareness among top decision makers. What we have discovered is that more and more, and we have been seeing that with Enron, Sir Henderson, and others, you really have to define unique strategy within your organization, which require a lot of listening, a lot of discussion with your different stakeholders and different employees worldwide. And that takes some courage to put some short-term return on investment on the back of your side and try to have a longer term, by longer term in 1 or 2 years, trying to map internally what would be the weakness list of your organization. So we have done that with many organizations now, but that's not I'm not on the panel, so I'd like to return that.
No, but you might have the data which helps us. How many companies do you think are doing that?
I would say 5%.
5% there, right. There's 95% opportunity. Sam, does that square with the kind of perception you have about creating a new coherent strategy?
Well, I can't say whether it's 5% or 25%. I will say that if you look back 3 to 5 years ago, what we saw was most companies were looking at these risks in isolation. They were looking at them from their own lens. And frankly, it's much, much more difficult to determine a response, a way to build a strategic response across your organization if you're defining through your own lens something that is as big as one of these risks. And what we've begun to see in the last several years is a much broader effort toward collaborative debate and sharing around how to deal with these kinds of risks. And then and frankly, it's been remarkable. We're seeing 30, 40, 50% of our clients engaged in some form of collaborative assessment of how to deal with these big, tough issues. And then they take that assessment out and build it through the normal processes of a company of how do we then begin to respond to whether it happens to be a pandemic or an energy crisis or if it is a cutoff of a supply chain. In fact, I think the understanding of it is much better done on a collaborative basis than doing it individually.
Mohammad al-Gergawi, there has been a lot of reporting, including the Arab Competitiveness Report back in April, reinforcing the fact that there are a lot of significant risks in your region and urging that many corporate institutions and governments should have a much clearer, coherent strategy on this. Frankly, how much do you think there's take-up on this? People realizing in your region just how serious some of the challenges you've identified are, including the one of unemployment?
I think for a regional company, they've been there. You got to understand, we live in the region where for the past 50 years we got some political system, they explore a new way of dealing with their economy. I cannot call it socialism, capitalism. It doesn't define by its name, basically. The risk is with multinational company. Do they understand our region quite well? And the risk also with the new impact, basically. The new changes, geopolitical changes that taken place in the region. In the past 6 years, tremendous change of power that took place in the region. How do we deal with this? I think in the long term, when we look at our region, within the next 5-6 years, I think a lot of government have changed their policy. They became wider open with their economic policy. They realize whatever they have practiced on its company, people for the past 30-50 years is absolutely nonsense. So I'm saying there is a tremendous opportunity. We had risk, but the opportunity is so huge, basically, for regional company, for multinational company to prosper in our region.
Coherent strategy for risk is the question from Wharton, though. Coherent strategy.
I think what the question is, you cannot just sit in 2 minutes and he said, you know, this is what I'm doing in my company, next company. It is much more complicated than just stating it in 2 minutes. I think every single company within our region is looking at the risks of our region. We've been doing it for a while. We didn't look at it just today. And I think we're seeing a migration also from being regional and going global. And by going global, I believe that a lot of our regional companies understand the risk that they are taking. It's not as much as risky in certain region within certain country. When you look at the Middle East, basically, countries are different. The flight from Muscat to Morocco is 9 hours. I mean, it's a huge region. So we cannot say the whole region, basically, but there is certain country that has risk, and I think multinational company, regional company, been dealing with it quite well, and they cope with it, and the growth been there. If you look at our region, the past, despite Iraq, what happened in Iraq, the growth of the economy in the Middle East and the Arab world been tremendous in the past 5-6 years.
Mr. Zhang, the 5-year plan, we're 1 year into the 5-year plan here, and what the Prime Minister said here yesterday, make it clear the risks of Chinese industry not addressing certain very fundamental issues. What's your assessment from your industrial and commercial bank about just how much there is an acceptance within the Chinese entrepreneurial class of the courage and investment that is needed and the risks that have to be taken?
作为全世界最大市值的一家银行，我们已经而且继续将走向全球。那么我们在走向全球的这个过程中间呢，确实也面对着许多风险。在不同的国家，它有不同的法律、文化、宗教，这个我们也会碰到不同的一些员工、雇员他们的一些观念等等各种方面的一些问题。这个问题呢，对任何的一家跨国公司都是很大的一个挑战。但是很难在这里讲一个或者一个统一的一个具体的一个怎么做法。我只想讲的，只能针对性的根据不同国家的特点，我们来做出一个应对的一个策略。但是我们作为一个跨国公司，我们尊重当地的文化，我们尊重当地的法律，这个宗教。同时呢，我觉得非常重要的话，在这个过程中间，要把我们的业务和我们的员工进一步的本地化，那么进一步的树立我们一个良好的品牌。而且呢，履行社会的责任，我想这样的跨国公司是一定会成功的。
Right, thank you very much. Could you just show me who wants to ask questions at the moment? I can see one there, one at the back as well. 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. I know the speed at which I have to produce answers now. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Aidan Connolly from the company Alltech. I'm wondering, given the current problems which have occurred recently with food, pet food, and the recall of some toys, is this an inevitable risk for companies in a global environment that these recalls will continue even when you're supplied by ostensibly companies which meet the safety criteria?
Any particular person you'd like to address that to?
It could be anybody.
I'll give you a quick answer. You want quick answers? It should absolutely be manageable, because what you've got to continue to do is to go back along your supply chain, and we do that as much as we can, and audit along your supply chain. And I think in some of the instances that you've seen with that are in the press recently, companies have said we have to increase our level of surveillance. And it is containable, but it is going to take more manpower, more diligence in terms of examining the whole supply chain. It used to be a very small supply chain. As we've globalized, the degree of quality control has in some instances diminished, and that's part of the core of the problem.
What are the lessons for Coca-Cola from a number of particular difficulties you've had in some countries?
Well, it is heightened awareness of the quality of every single input, and its greater audit against the agreed standards you have with secondary suppliers.
Just to underline what the Prime Minister said here yesterday in his speech about the vigilance here, I mean, did that partially answer, can you just take the microphone again, did that partially answer your question? Because that's come from the top.
I think obviously there is some pertinence to the Chinese situation. There's no question of this question. But I still feel that even when you're supplied by companies which seem to fulfill those criteria, that risk still exists. And I think, as mentioned in terms of Coca-Cola, the requirement for auditing suppliers who even have met the legal requirements seems to be part of what we're looking forward to in the future.
Is there anything, Sam, from your experience on the way clients handle this, whether in the most developed countries or the developing countries, whether large or small?
Yeah, I think the way Neville described it is simply indicative of many of these risks that you're dealing with. You talk about product issues, but almost every one of these issues that we're talking about have an incredible interdependency around the world or through a supply chain. And so, frankly, when you think about a supply chain of a consumer product company, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was much easier to trace it back through the supply chain where the pieces came from. Today, the knowledge is moving much faster, the awareness of consumers is moving much faster, so the risk is bigger if you don't do exactly as Neville said, be diligent in the inspection of your own supply chain.
And moving in a very timely way.
Yeah, you have no time to delay on any issue. And frankly, it doesn't have to be an issue in your supply chain. If it's an issue in one of your competitors or a comparable kind of company, you got to be able to respond pretty quickly, because the world is connected entirely around these kinds of issues.
Could I ask you to add this to your answer? The culture, particularly in certain countries, of how things can be done and may have been done in the past, how much is that an important variable which has to be confronted?
Well, I don't believe it's necessarily one of culture if you put the controls in that I've talked about. But the add-on point I wanted to make was you've got two levels of risk, real risk and perceived risk. As analytical capabilities have increased to analyzing for any sort of pesticide pollutant from parts per million to parts per billion to parts per trillion, there is risk of discovery of something that may be carcinogenic at part per million, but which has absolutely no effect on human health at a part per trillion, but you don't want it in your product because the perceived risk is major. And that's a heightened risk, reputational risk, that companies face today, which just exacerbates the need to have more diligence along your supply chain.
Mr. Zhang, how much does due diligence and compliance take an increasing position in your investment and those you are dealing with?
这个我想呢，刚才讲到了这个产品的质量的问题。我们始终会遇到这个产品质量问题，风险。那么，在我的领域来看，金融领域来看，那个前不久呢，这个美国的金融机构也是创造了最大的次品，就是出售了他们大量的这个世界按揭的这个证券，对吧？像碰到这些问题呢，就是我们要及时的、针对性的采取的措施。当然，从金融领域来看，那么我们的这种尽职的调查是非常重要的，不要被一些问题的表面所掩盖。比如说，看到一个债券非常具有很好的流动性，就忽略了这个债券背后它本身这个信用的这个方面存在的风险。
Please, at the back.
Hi, my name is Bill Powell. I'm a senior writer with Time magazine based down in Shanghai. I wanted to take this discussion a little bit into the geopolitical realm. There's this country out there called Iran in the heart of the Persian Gulf. And it wasn't George W. Bush, the cowboy from Crawford, who just a few days ago said, the world is either going to have to deal with an Iran with the bomb, or somebody is going to have to bomb Iran. Which is the greater threat to global growth? Iran with a bomb, or a bombed Iran?
That's the easy question, Mohammad al-Gergawi.
I know that I've been targeting with let me say, all the bombs are a threat to the world. Doesn't matter where it comes from. If a single country use a bomb, they know that there is a retaliation, basically. The whole question is, we're going through a crazy age, unfortunately. We need a lot of wisdom. In the next 5 years, I think the world scene is going to be a difficult world scene. In this time and age, wisdom, tolerance, this is something that we have to preach. But I agree, I think whatever we are seeing in the world today is we moved out of the 90s. There is, after the Cold War, and we thought that the world's going to flourish and it's going to be a prettier place, basically. Unfortunately, we moved to an era, basically, where the Cold War is there almost. We've seen it in many different ways here. Our stand, we'd like to have a Middle East free from any weapon of mass destruction. Thank you very much. And the word, hopefully.
Can I, though, just help my colleague from Time magazine and ask, do you believe that Iran could be in a position sometime in the near future, as you assess risk across the Gulf, and you and the GCC and beyond assess this risk, that it might become another Libya or North Korea, giving up its current accumulation of the suspected capacity to have a nuclear weapon?
I really don't know. The Iranian, they're saying they want to use their system basically for a peaceful solution. I have no answer, basically.
But you plan for the worst as opposed to the optimistic?
We assist our region quite well, and we've been assisting our region quite well in the past 30, 40 years. And I think we dealt with every single situation in the right manner. I mean, during the Iraqi-Irani war, we assisted and we managed the whole situation when it comes to a country, a company. During the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, we did the similar thing. The third war, Gulf War, basically, we've been doing the same. We live in a tough neighborhood. We gotta understand our neighbor. We gotta deal with them, and we gotta live with them. They've been there for the past 2,000 years, and they're gonna be there also for the next 2,000 or 3,000 years.
Thank you. How many other hands, please? One here, two down, two at the front anyway. And is there a third over there? Yes, right at the back. I can see you. Okay, get a microphone across to you, can you?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for that question. Second of all,
Where are you from, please?
Mohammad comes from Dubai, Emirates. My question is quite simple. We've been discussing globalization and risk assessment and global economies for the past while, and I think nobody sits here that doesn't know or has been preached to what it means for the past 10 years, 15 years. My question is how, and this goes obviously to everybody on the panel, the biggest and the strongest push on globalization has come within the past 2 decades from the United States, obviously, because of their willingness to expand overseas and to explore new markets. This is a new concept to us in the Middle East, a new concept for a lot of us throughout the world. So given the fact that it's a US-based concept, and given the fact that there's a lot of power being put behind it, how do you see the US's foreign policy promoting such indifference to business activities and indifference to political agendas that have been pushed in its foreign policy, and how does that control the risk assessment that we are all discussing today? Because in my point of view, personally, I think that's the biggest risk to global economies that we face today, and not what we have discussed so far. I think most of what we have discussed is micro economies within each of our political geographical boundaries. But talking from the political point of view of the United States, I think that's what really touches on the global economies and what provides the biggest risk. Just your point of view, please.
Nick Eberstadt.
Well, I think Neville touched upon this a little bit earlier. There's still, I think, quite a powerful consensus among what you might call opinion leaders in the United States in favor of what we now call globalization, liberal international economic order, movement of goods and services and capital internationally. What bothers me, what I would say is the risk here, is a domestic political risk in the United States, a growing potential backlash against globalization. And it may sound odd to think of a backlash developing domestically in the United States, since the United States has been such a beneficiary of globalization. But the signs are at least on the horizon. As you know now, we're having quite a debate in the United States about immigration. We're building this lovely wall along the border with Mexico. In both major political parties in the United States, there is an increasingly loud, if not dominant, protectionist wing. And one has to wonder, or at least do the thought experiment, what happens if some sort of international shock were to lead, heaven forbid, to an unemployment rate of 6% or 6.5% or some level substantially below the Western European employment level. What would happen in the United States politically? The United States has had lots of experience with protectionism leading to prolonged international recessions and depressions. We can go back to Smoot-Hawley and all of that. But I would think that the domestic political anti-globalization reaction in the United States is one risk to the world economy that we need to think about.
Sam.
It may be interesting to you. It's a great question. The WEF has actually just done a piece of work around global growth and global risk, and we at PwC had helped them do some of this work. And one of the outputs was to create a bit of a scale of what are the big risks that we're dealing with, what are the most likely, and what are the most severe. And it's very interesting. At the very top of the most likely and the very top of the most severe is retrenchment from globalization. If that happens, it will affect global growth economies in a dramatic way. If you go deeper in the report, what you also see is one of the big concerns that come from the interviews that are the basis of this work is U.S. retrenchment around its own approach to globalization, and frankly, result being the U.S. growth engine stops.
What are the odds on that? What's the probability you put on it?
It's interesting. The retrenchment from globalization, the concern was in the 5 to 15% range among the interviews. That's a big number that is likely to happen. 5 to 15% of the dozens of, it's probably close to 100 people that were chatted with said that's going to happen. And the U.S. retrenchment was right at the top of that list as well.
When was that done, Sam?
Just finished.
Okay.
Just completed. So, I mean, I actually think that the U.S. has led this effort around globalizing the markets. And if U.S. foreign policy takes us backwards, it's a big price that global economies are going to pay.
Anyone want to add anything? Okay, at the back, please. Someone has the microphone there. I can see her.
江董事长您好，我是来自中华工商时报的记者。我想问一下，我们都已经知道，本次年会呢，我们大连就已经有6家民营企业入围了达沃斯的签约会员。那么我想知道，既然今天我们谈到了全球化、全球的风险，那么我想知道，对这些民营企业，他们所面对的风险主要有什么？你对他们的建议又是什么？谢谢。
民营经济呢正在迅速的这个发展，他们也得到了各个方面的重视。ICBC 呢，从工商银行从去年到今年的上半年，我们对这部分小企业的信贷的成长都超过了70%。但是呢，对这些民营企业在长大的过程中，他们会面对很多的风险。这个外部激烈的市场的竞争啊，这个居民消费的这种偏好的这种变化，然后呢，这种资源的这种获得，将来包括他们在走出去的时候，也会遇到我刚才所说的很多的风险。所以呢，在这个过程中间呢，他们需要更多的学习。
Do you believe they are prepared for that the directors and the entrepreneurs are ready for it? Because there are those in the business academies who say that in China there's still a lack of preparation for this reality.
我看是部分的已经做好了准备。
One more question. Do you make an assessment before you're lending money about the ability of those on the board, those managers, about whether they can compete in the way that question asks?
这是一个最重要的评估的指标。我们之所以到现在他们的不良贷款的平均的水平是0.8%，就是因为他们管理层的素质好。
All right, I saw someone's hand go up there. Yes, please. Could you get the microphone across? No, over in the far side. Gentleman standing up.
大家好，我是香港大公报的记者，想问一下江行长，我们知道这个港股直通车的这个在滨海新区做了第一个试点，那么了解到工商银行有希望这个成为第2个试点，想请问一下江行长这方面的情况，谢谢。
我们正在做各种的准备，这里面包括管理、内部控制、IT、人员培训等等。一旦等到监管机构的批准以后，我们既能够迅速的开办业务，而且防范任何的风险。
Two more questions, one at the front. Let's keep it on global risks to global growth, please.
Samir Al-Ansari, Dubai International Capital. The session really is about globalization and the risks to globalization. One of the key issues that we need to talk about that hasn't really been addressed at all is free capital flow, without which you cannot have global growth. And I'm discovering as the chairman of an investment company that these days you have to be more, I guess, politically savvy and maybe PR savvy than having to be investment savvy to make investments around the world. So I really wanted the panel's opinion on sovereign investment funds and the issues and the concerns and all the noises that have been coming out recently on sovereign investment funds.
Who would like to take that? Mr. Zhang?
这个最近关于主权财富基金呢，引起了很多方面的这个重视和关注啊。最近在很多的国家都有类似的一些讨论会。当然，我觉得呢，这是一个新出来的一种一个方面的资金方面的一种力量吧。大家引起重视和关心，确实是正确的。未来我也相信，这个可能会有一定的规则。来对这些主权的财富基金，当然，我觉得呢，当前在世界上更应该值得重视，而制定一定的监管规则的，是比这个主权财富基金规模更大的对冲基金。
Sam, particularly after that last remark.
You obviously saw my face as we talked about regulating hedge funds. I think you have to go careful both on the sovereign funds and on the hedge funds. I think that the capital markets operate in a fairly sophisticated and flexible way, and I think when you begin to restrict these by suggesting hedge fund regulation and the hedge funds, you have sophisticated investors placing money into a recognized high-risk involvement. That's their choice, and I'm not sure the regulator can add a lot of value by creating too much oversight. Sovereign funds, I mean, it depends how they're used, but sovereign funds that create capital flow inside of sovereignty, if that's the choice of the investor, that's the choice of the investor. And frankly, I'm not sure regulation makes this a whole lot better. So I'm a free capital market kind of guy, just as I am a free trade person. You better be careful when you put restrictions on these kinds of activities.
Is there one final question out there? Let's see one in the middle, please. Microphone there. Ah, I have two. Right. Very quick. I can't get maybe an answer, but at least make your point. Over there and over here, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malala Juya. I'm a member of the Parliament of Afghanistan. As this program is about global risk, I want to talk about people of Afghanistan who right now they are facing.
Could I ask you to ask a question, though, please?
Yeah. This question is about the mockery democracy of US that unfortunately after 9/11 tragedy they replaced instead of Taliban Northern Alliance killers who committed same crimes before Taliban government, who are mentally same like Taliban but physically they change and they come in power. And right now it's biggest stigma on the forehead of US that Afghanistan is one of the biggest producer of the opium. And also the most risk and problem of our people is security, that more important than food and water. And also there is lots of violences against women and many more examples like this. And my question is this: how is it possible to stop US from this wrong policy, which is mockery of democracy and mockery of war on terror? And we need the support of democratic-minded people around the world, which is very important for our people.
All right. Does anyone on the panel see that situation in Afghanistan as threatening global growth, as a risk to global growth? Nick, are you about to offer a view?
I guess I'd follow the population numbers in Afghanistan a little bit more than these questions.
I'm not sure we're going to get an answer unless... No, I don't see any takers on that. Can I go to one final question? Please, you have the microphone.
Vitold Henish, I'm an associate professor of management at the Wharton School. I've heard both on this panel and in a panel on regulatory risk the idea that this retrenchment against globalization is one of the central risks that we face. but also a lack of willingness to engage in the political process, a sense that somehow politics is best left to the politicians, that we implore them to follow through on the Doha trade round and do other things that can maintain openness, but that we don't want to engage in that political process. And if it's so central, I guess I'd ask you what we can do to increase the engagement of top management teams in that political process, increase the capacity to engage, and increase the recognition that that engagement is important.
Please, Sam.
Yeah, I would actually say that I disagree that business says leave these things up to the politicians. Obviously, public policy, you're going to have to work yourself through the government processes. But when you look at organizations like the Transatlantic Business Dialogue that Neville's had a lot of involvement with over time, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, made up of businesses going after issues of climate change. Businesses are working in a collaborative way today in ways they've never worked in before to deal with tough issues just like you described. And if we leave it up to politicians to make the judgments about Doha, they're going to go to their local voters. And those voters may or may not understand the implications. Now, business can't make the judgment, but they better have their voice heard. And frankly, I think today, in places like here at the WEF, and a lot of other organizations that businesses are part of, they recognize their obligation.
Neville, quickly.
Well, I just echo what Sam says. I mean, I spend a great deal of my time in that arena. It's why I'm here. It's why I was in Singapore. It's why I'm chairman of the U.S.-Russia Business Council. I was chairman of the Transatlantic Business Dialogue. It's to do exactly that and to do another part of risk management. So we're involved in that process. The difference is that we haven't been voted into a political position to then espouse, a specific law. What we have to do is look at it systemically, look at it for our industries. So we are hidden in these other groupings, which gives us actually more weight and more heft in the political dynamic. But to come out as an individual business, when some of our employees will disagree with us, some of our shareholders will disagree with us, is not the way that it should be done. It's not the way that it is done. But because you don't see it in that dimension, don't be mistaken about the fact that we are very, very involved, because we are very, very concerned.
Any other views up here?
Early in my speech, I mentioned, I think, the role of CEO, he should be / politician somehow there. But I think I agree with both of you, your point of view. But we got to look also at other than the state and the West. We got to look at other regions where really government run the business in a way. And the government are the gate for the businesses. And I think we need to build more pressure in government and certain region to open up.
Mr. Zhang or Nick, do you have a final word?
对于在全球一些有影响力的一些大的企业，我觉得对在全球经济发展中出现的一些这个问题，应该表达他们自己的意见。就像刚才讨论中间大家讲到的，比如说现在出现的贸易保护主义的这种错误的这种想法，我觉得应该大胆地说出自己的想法，因为现在的这种贸易保护主义，这种是解决不了像比如美国现在存在的它的储蓄不足、消费过度、财政和贸易赤字的问题。我觉得这样的一种贸易保护主义的发展，可能会导致全球的经济会走向衰退。
Can I thank you all very much indeed? It's time for the Tech Pioneer cocktail up in the village. Thank you.